And for more on von der Leyen's trip, European Affairs editor Kat Nicholson is here in the studio. Hello again, Kat. So we heard both von der Leyen and Macron emphasizing this European defense project that they say needs more support, particularly in light of what Russia is doing near the Ukrainian border.
Indeed.
So tell us more about this defense project. What does this look like?
So the European Commission currently working on something that they're calling the EU's strategic compass. It's a new geopolitical strategy for the European Union, encompassing all sorts of aspects. There is definitely more focus, much more focus than there was previously, on increasing Europe's defence capacity. And Emmanuel Macron said today that it's about allowing European member states, who are of course NATO members, to have a common European position within NATO. Well, they've talked about this in the past as like a European pillar in NATO. He wants EU states basically to be more coordinated when it comes to defence and geopolitical matters. In terms of Ukraine specifically, Macron really wants to refresh relations with Moscow, especially in light, as you said, of the Ukraine crisis, but also what's been happening in Belarus, where Moscow very much seen as the backer or guarantor of what goes on there. So on Ukraine, for now, Vladimir Putin only talking about that to Joe Biden, a meeting scheduled in Geneva on Monday. Of course, the EU clearly feeling quite squeezed out when it comes to all this. The French foreign minister said as much today that Russia's trying to bypass the European Union, and the European Union saying, hello, this is a European geographical country. It borders 4 EU states. The EU is also heavily reliant on gas supplies that cross Ukraine. It's a big donor of financial aid to Ukraine. So these are quite high stakes for the European Union, what goes on in Ukraine. Ursula von der Leyen said any talks on resolving the Ukraine crisis must involve the EU. We'll have to see, of course, if that comes to pass.
Now, this press conference was supposed to be all about France taking over the EU Council presidency, but journalists had their own ideas. A lot of questions today about Macron's controversial comments earlier this week, saying he wants to piss off unvaccinated French people. I mean, the French word he used is a little more vulgar than that. But
yes,
that's the general
get the general sense. Yes. Well, indeed, it wasn't what the conference was supposed to be about. But the French president happily stood by those comments. He said, yes, I want to make life harder for people who are choosing not to be vaccinated, even though they're eligible, and doing this by limiting their access to things like restaurants, cafes and cinemas. He actually seemed to sort of double down on those comments, I think, saying that individual freedoms end where they impinge on other people's freedom. This is something we've heard a lot from French government officials over the last few days. They've argued that unvaccinated people make up a disproportionate amount of those who are being hospitalised, taking up intensive care beds, and saying, look, you defending your individual freedom is making it worse for the great majority of people. That's their argument. He reminded the audience that some EU states have mandatory vaccines. Austria making it mandatory for everyone from February the 1st. A lot of them have mandatory vaccines for health workers, and that is not on the table to make it mandatory for all the population here in France. Ursula von der Leyen spoke a little bit more guardedly on this topic. As you said, it wasn't meant to be part of the press conference. She talked about balancing freedoms for individuals and the collective. It was perhaps not super diplomatic of Emmanuel Macron to talk so much about this on this particular grand occasion, launching, as you said, France's rotating presidency of the European Council. As the country holding that position, as France is, you're normally meant to be sort of seeking consensus and trying to bring European countries together and not sort of launching great fiery debates and being controversial. But then, there we are, that's Emmanuel Macron. His words, he has stood by them.
And not ceding the stage to Ursula
Certainly not
today either. European Affairs editor Kat Nicholson, thanks for breaking that down for us.
Thank you.